So I'm lucky enough to have seen all 6 episodes of this, and I can tell you that it gets twistier and more elaborate as it goes on, and you go to even more locations, Morocco, Turkey. And Susanne, you directed all 6 episodes, which is very unusual for television. Was there any conversation about getting other directors in, or was it always going to be one director for all 6?
It was always going to be, I mean, if I was to do it, I was going to do all 6. It was actually conceived like a very, very long film, because it's like one novel, and it was pretty much from all our conversations sort of one majorly long story. And there was a point where we kind of thought, no, we're not going to break it up. We're going to try and make this immensely long film, which weren't exactly what we were meant to do, but it was sort of thought out like that.
And so that must have made it easier for you as an actor to deal with one director for all of the episodes.
Yes, I mean, I never considered the idea that it wouldn't be Susanne for the whole thing. And it's true what Susanne says, which is the way we conceived of it, the adaptation, the way we wrote the scripts, the way we shot it. It was one project. It never felt divided into pieces. Certainly, our schedule felt like a long feature film because we didn't shoot it episodically. So we sort of did bits of episode 1, then episode 2, then episode 1 and 6.
This is one day Tom is talking about.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I mean, there was a moment where I was doing 1 and 6 pretty much in rotation every day, and there's a lot of story between 1 and 6, and it just felt like the beginning of the film and the end of the film. The demand or the discipline on both of us is to be precise in each moment while managing to retain a perspective on the whole. And normally you have 100 to 120 pages, and we had 360. But that's what made it fun.
So
it was amazing.
Yeah.
It was. And it was also interesting because we did play around with it. We did sort of change stuff while doing it, and we did, and while doing that, we would always kind of, we had this regular thing of Sunday morning, 8 o'clock. Who was going to call? I mean, that was the only day off, and who was going to call the other one first?
Yeah.
And it really was about that week, and a lot of it was about, if we do that to that scene, is it going to have implications for other, like for logistics further down the line? And
because the script is a roadmap in so many ways, and sometimes you change direction, and that affects the rest of the journey. And so those conversations, Susanne and I were so in it. We were the only people who were sort of there every day, and you have to be vigilant about the work in front of you, and be present with Monday's work, and you're not thinking about Friday. So by the time Sunday morning came, that was the only time we got to really consider the whole and keep ourselves on parallel tracks.
And what did you decide about what really motivates Jonathan Pine? At the end of that first episode, we see Angela Bier say, "Why are you doing this?" And you as an actor have to decide what he's really driven by, not what he says he's driven by. What did you figure out about him?
Well, I know for myself what I think he's driven by, but it's one of those things where I'm hesitant because I also want you to make your minds up. There are a whole host of things that it could be. I'm just gonna.
Well, he could be an idealist, or he could be just addicted to danger, or addicted to dangerous women. Did you have conversations about all of those things? The two of you?
Well, here's what I will say.
Don't say it.
No, I can say this. I think that in le Carré's writing, and this isn't necessarily a clue, but it is something that I can talk about and have talked about. There is an extraordinary sense of moral principle and an anger, essentially, that really, through Bier and through Pine, there is an expression of John le Carré's own anger about what I think is a betrayal of honor by Roper. That Roper is a man who has been given so much. He is deeply blessed. He's been given all the freedom and the privilege of a British citizenship, of the education and the democracy, and that he's used those privileges to do the worst things imaginable, which in le Carré's mind is deeply cynical. And I think that is the substance of the material, really, is that there is a conversation about moral duty within the breadth of the Night Manager itself.
Can I add?
Of course.
I think John le Carré is driven by a completely limitless hatred to hypocrisy. And part of the book, and part of that book, is some kind of playing around with the sort of temptations of hypocrisy in all aspects of the word. And I think that's sort of also, and I think Jonathan, the excitement, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think part of the excitement about Jonathan Pine is sort of the enigma. Is he gonna stick to his moral mission, or is he going to be corrupted by the temptations of Roper's world? And I want to say, at this point, there is still a part of me in doubt.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, at this
By the
point,
way, Bier isn't the only character to ask him why.
No.
Throughout the course of the
Yeah.
series, people
Yeah.
keep challenging his motivation,
Yeah.
which is why I'm slightly
Yeah.
sketchy about telling you.
Challenging his motivation and challenging in a sort of quite sophisticated way his identity.
well, you've both said at various times that actors are a little bit like spies. How so?
Sorry?
Actors are like spies, you said. How? In what way?
He's a spy.
Spying on you all right now. I think, le Carré's talked about it, about something in, he's fascinated by identity and the construction of it. There's so much about the things that signify our identity. And to what extent are we in control of those signifiers? You know, we tell, to give ourselves definition and self-esteem in the world, we all tell ourselves the story of ourselves, and we are reassured by the reflection of that story in the outside world, by our family and by our friends. We say, this is who I am, this is where I was born, this is who my friends are, this is what I like to eat, this is the music I listen to, this is how I dress. And unknowingly or knowingly, we put together a sense of identity. And I think a spy surrenders that identity, or allows for multiplicity and movement within it. In some way, actors do this too, which is allowing yourself to embrace your potential to be other things. You're not just one thing, you are not just one person, you can express many things. We contain multitudes, to bastardize Walt Whitman. There we go, so I'm now digressing. But I think I found this, I truly found this fascinating, and le Carré himself has gone on record as talking about the similarity between acting and espionage. Is the ease with which you can surrender one identity and put on another and be convincing.
And I want to add that I do think that there is a potential deep loneliness, which is also really prevalent in Le Carré, and which is, by the way, also extremely prevalent at Jonathan Pine. And which is also quite common with actors, but of course the secretness of being a spy is very, very different from the secretness of being an actor. I mean, the actors are not by nature forced to being as lonely as spies are. But but I think in a way it's a kind of an access to understand that whole process of being someone else.
Did you talk to Le Carré about any of this? I know he was around, and you have a scene with him. He has a one-scene cameo. You actually directed him. What was it like to direct John le Carré?
Well, firstly, I want to say that he has been involved, and he's been incredibly supportive and incredibly interesting to talk about. Like just to finish the spy business, one of the things he was very helpful with was how does the handler, the handler who in this case is Bier, who sends the agent into the field. What does he feel? How does it work? And I was surprised to be told by John le Carré how emotional involved she'd be, how important it would be for her that the mission would go right. Having said that, John le Carré is, I want to say he's not the easiest actor we've worked with, right?
He doesn't take direction well?
Yeah.
He wants to completely agree with what is going on, and he gave Tom quite a hard time.
Well, you have a scene together where you actually have lines with him, so what was that like?
Well, I don't want to spoil anything,
No.
but he...
as an acting partner, what was he like?
Well... In order for the scene to work, it was a very simple requirement, which was that he should be charmed by me, and he refused to be.
He's the only one in the world, by the way. But
I'm not sure if he knew that was what the requirement was.
No, I just think he didn't think.
He wasn't. He's a very truthful man, and. He simply didn't believe me, I think. So I kept saying to Susanne between takes, I feel like this is going on a bit long. We should try and kind of curtail because it's not really what the scene's about. There's something else happening, and that's really what the scene's about. And Susanne would say, it's John le Carré. I'm not going to tell him what to do. You have to work harder. So I did.
Well, I want to say he was such a great sport. It was very, very hot, and there were lots of extras, and he was sitting for 12 hours in 40 degrees and being utterly charming, being utterly fun. And I actually didn't really want it to be over.
I know. He was great. He was. I've always said acting is a bit like playing tennis. When it's working, you're surprised by the shots you're getting back across the net, and my God, I was surprised by it. You got a powerful
he's a big
return.
fan of the series. He has said very effusive, wonderful things about the series, and he's a fan, even though there are big changes from the novel. For example, when you first came on, both of you, was Angela Bier still Leonard because she's a man in the novel?
Yes.
Yeah.
And at what point did Leonard become Angela, and how did that change the dynamic?
It was Susanne's idea.
No, it was my idea.
It wasn't?
When on my first conversation with Stephen Garrett, they had said that
one of the producers.
Part of the exercise here with the script was transfer it from '93, where the novel was written, to present time. And part of what is luckily happening in present time is that our world is actually slightly more diverse than, and even the world of spies are more diverse than being kind of controlled by white men having gone to public schools, and so it seemed like a very good, obvious choice to make Bier a woman, and then Olivia Colman was my one and only choice.
And she happened to be pregnant at the time.
Yes, yeah. She told me on our first meeting that she was pregnant, and I thought it's fantastic for the part, and I'm sure that insurance companies are going to have a bit of an issue. But their issue wasn't forceful enough for us to not go through with it.
Mm-hmm. And how did that change the dynamic for you, dealing with the handler who was a pregnant woman rather than a middle-aged white man?
Oh God! I mean, honestly, Susanne told me quite early on, and it was an idea I loved. And from that moment, I never questioned it. Strangely enough, I never, until this very moment, I've not conceived of what it would have been like with a man. I think it works beautifully, and to your point, Le Carré said about that relationship was really touching, because he came to a meeting after our first read-through, and that was he led with that first note, because it's quite, they're sort of, Pine to some extent is an employee of Bier, and Bier is pulling the strings, and then Pine's a real boy, to use a Pinocchio analogy. He starts making his own decisions, and it was quite, their exchanges were quite curt and heated, and this note from Le Carré that it was much more gentle, that relationship between them was very gentle, very compassionate, very understanding, that the agent runner has such a deep empathy for the stress of the field agent, that those conversations were always almost parental or familial. And I think our very first day's shooting was the scene in the restaurant at the end of episode 1 between myself and Olivia, and from that moment we were absolutely connected. She's a pleasure to work with, so warm and so humane, and so and she's such a deeply good person. It was great.
And you also have a lot of scenes going on with Hugh Laurie, who plays the worst man in the world.
Yeah.
How did that dynamic go for you as actors? Did you talk through things, or did you decide, since you're antagonists, that you should not?
We
talk
talked through everything. We still talk through everything. No, working with Hugh was extraordinary, because he's been such a passionate defender of this story for so long. He loves it. It's one of his favorite novels of all time. And so he was a champion. He was a keeper of the flame, and we all talked together all the time about the intricacies of that relationship, that actually the complexity of it is that they like each other so much, that Roper and Pine are in many ways very similar. They share a sense of humor, they share a frame of reference, and they're drawn to each other and seduced by each other in some way, which makes that tension of antagonism much more nuanced. And when to turn the dials in one direction or the other was something we kind of calibrated every day. Do you want to add to that, Susanne?
Yeah. Hugh Laurie wanted to buy the book when it came out, and actually he wanted to play Jonathan Pine.
He did. I think he would have been great.
and he.
There's no way I could play Richard Roper, by the way. So wait a few years. Yeah.
I think actually there was kind of pondering about that, and then other people got the film rights, and it was never made. And it was never made, most likely because it was never meant to be a feature film, but it should be a television series like we did it. But I think part of that he had reflected so much about the characters that there was some kind of weird insight from him, which was incredibly inspiring and interesting. There's also, he's also like a quite he's full of surprises. Like about a week before we were going to start, he came and said no, he wasn't going to do it, and he had this long list of alternative actors who he thought would be way better. And I was on my own with him. Everybody else were on a recce, and I was sitting on my own with Hugh in this huge, big, like a top floor, a very big empty building, which was the production office, where there normally are like 150 people. So it was him and me all on our own in this huge, big space with the list of alternative actors. And I was like, Hugh, I don't think that's such a great idea. And he went on with other names, and I said, look, you are right for it. And he then went home, and he came back, and we had dinner next day, and it was fine. But I think that sort of, there's a kind of constant search in him, a constant sort of trying to figure out what is right, which you don't really, which is not really in the writing of The Worst Man in the World, but add that to to very convincing writing of the worst man in the world, and you get someone who actually managed to be a real human being, in spite of actually being the worst man in the world.
Yes. Yeah.
Can I say something about Jonathan? Then I want to.
Yes. Yeah, we want to go to questions from the audience.
I think what Tom does with Jonathan Pine as an actor is utterly fascinating because it ties into the spy thing. Because what you do is that you have a lot of enigma as an actor. Like you have a lot of sort of there's a lot of mystery. Whatever you act, whatever you play, you'll always be very, very enigmatic. But what that does, because it's so interesting because you keep watching. That's how I feel. I'm sure all of you feel the same way. Like you keep watching Tom, and it's always fascinating. And I can kind of watch. I've been seeing like 300 hours of material. I don't get fed up with it. But I never really know everything. There's always an element I don't know. And I think that that's an amazing thing for an actor to have. And very few has it.
And so, perfect for this.
Yeah.
Absolutely
Thank
perfect
you,
for
Susanne.
this series.
Yeah.
Very much.
So we have some microphones out there, and we can take some questions from you. So let's wait for whoever has the microphone right there. So wherever, go ahead.
That's great.
Lots of questions.
That's
yeah.
nice.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Christine from Norway. This is a question for Susanne. Always been such an admirer of your directing style, and I was just curious. Yes, and I was just curious of what is your process with the actors? Like,
Sorry, what is it? What?
Your process with your actors? Do you do a lot of rehearsal before shooting, or are you open to any improvisations on set, or like how do you work with the actors?
Every morning we rehearse for about an hour and a half before the crew comes, and it sort of enables us to we own the set in a way, and then the crew comes and then we show them what we've done, and then we probably change it again. But at that point, everybody is very comfortable and everybody have raised their worries or suggestions, and do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, what's so interesting about the process of filming is that you can go through many, many, many iterations of the script, and you can rework drafts, and you can hone the writing down, and everybody thinks they know where they're going or what they're doing, and then you get on set into the location, and it's a location you haven't seen or a set you haven't seen, and suddenly you get new ideas. Everybody does. You go, hang on, well, does this writing make sense? This restaurant doesn't look like the restaurant in the script. So would there be a waiter crossing with that thing? That, you know, those tiny details that are true of real life, which you're going to set for the rest of the day and shoot very fast. Susanne has an extraordinary and unique rigor about, which is it's brilliantly rebellious with the writing, which is making sure that what is going through the camera is real and interesting and dramatic and part of the story. Just because it has been, just because it's been sort of proofed and printed on the page in our script, doesn't mean it necessarily is right on the day, in the light, with the actors. And that rigor is really amazing because it makes the work very vital and very alive in the moment, which I hope is what you see from everyone on screen in the course of The Night Manager, is that this and it takes incredible stamina to keep being muscular with the writing and challenging it and questioning it. Sometimes there were scenes which were very easy to shoot, they played themselves. Other scenes were like, hang on, this is tricky, this is different. But that rigor is something I admire enormously.
It's not just about the location. It's about the moment.
Yeah.
The moment needs to be real. And you can sense it, and you can fight with it, and then you need to change it if it's not real.
Sometimes you can read something that's real, and then you stage it and it isn't anymore.
Yeah.
Other questions? Who has the microphone? We're back there. you have the microphone? Go ahead. Anyone back there.
Which
Right
one?
Just stand
right
up
Here,
and-
right here. Yeah, so, sorry.
My name is also Christine. I read the book, and this is an amazing adaptation. It's not often that I watch something and go, wow, that's what I experienced reading the book. How, as you're making something like this, when there's so much interior emotion and complexity going on within the characters, how do you put it together when so much of, like Jonathan Pine's character is that he's supposed to be hiding what he's feeling from everybody else?
Well, the book became a kind of a constant companion, and I would always try to check in with the book in my preparation at the weekend or at night, and try to refamiliarize myself with those passages, because it gives you an extra. It just gives you an extra cushion. You have something that can really elevate what you're doing. But in the end, I simply had to trust the story and trust you as an audience, that the story was strong enough that you would read, I hope, you would read what I was concealing in a way that wasn't so loud that people in the room on screen would read it, if that makes sense. And that's also part of Susanne's immense technique and vision, in the way she, with Michael Snyman, our director of photography, the way she insisted on, in very intimate moments where Pine's still waters run deep, so to speak, the camera is very close, and the camera is ruthless in its depiction of truth, in a good way, which is, if it's there, it will capture it. And so I just had to make sure that I was in the right headspace or thinking the right things, and the camera, I think, can see it.
Unfortunately, we have to end this, but Susanne, do you have anything to add as a last word on this?
No, there were so many people wanting to ask
I
questions.
know, but we apparently have to get out of this space to let the next movie in. So thank you all for this, and thank you both
Thanks so
so
much
much
for
for
coming,
being
everybody.
so
Thank you.
eloquent about this.